Welcome to this introduction to sentence mapping. This is one of the three aids for analyzing sentences that I present in Using and Enjoying Biblical Greek. In another video I introduced chunking and scanning sentences in Greek, and now I'll introduce this third tool for analyzing a sentence. In Using and Enjoying Biblical Greek I offer detailed guidance for learning this technique. In this video I'll go over the main features to get you started. Hopefully this introduction will help you sort out the further details in the book. It's easier to learn this tool working in English, so we'll start with English in this video and then see how the principles are applied when we come to Greek texts. The first step is to obtain a copy of your passage in English. If you don't have a Bible software program that you can copy and paste passages from, then there are a number of sites on the web that offer copies of the Bible. One convenient one is BibleHub.com. In the video on chunking and scanning we saw how to get a Greek text from this website, so now let's see how to get one in English. Here you see the home page. You can type your passage in that text box at the top, and then once you search for that, it'll bring up an English translation. You either go with that one or click on Multi and see a variety of English and other foreign language translations, or click on Version and choose a version you want from that drop-down list, and then just copy and paste your text to be able to work with it in your word processor. Now let's look at the main guidelines for mapping and then map a couple of passages. Sentence maps rearrange a sentence to display the relations between the elements in a sentence so you can see the flow. Just as geographical maps can provide different levels of detail, so there are different levels of sentence maps. In a level 1 map we see the relations between clauses, then a level 2 map separates out the prepositional phrases, and a level 3 map goes yet deeper and can analyze the structures within clauses and phrases. Before starting a map I suggest you reset your tab settings to 1/4 inch. So we begin on the level of the clause, and so our first step is to divide the sentences in the passage into clauses. Punctuation, conjunctions, and verbs help you recognize clauses. Periods and question marks always indicate a break between clauses. Commas can do so as well, but often don't. Clauses are often initiated by conjunctions, and locating verbs helps identify clauses since a clause is centered on a verb. So here's our first passage. I invite you to pause the video and try mapping this verse with a level 1 map. Begin by identifying the clauses. Here's how I'd begin, and notice I've separated not only the finite verbs, marked here in yellow, but also the two participles, knowing and lacking. And you see the verbs and participles each have their own line. And notice also I've tabbed everything to be flush on the left margin. So now in our second step we align the coordinate clauses flush with each other and indent subordinate clauses, placing the beginning of the subordinate clause under the verb of the clause it modifies, since the verb's the core of the clause. For a rough guide to identifying clauses, note which conjunctions are used. Coordinate clauses begin with such conjunctions as you see on the screen, and here are some of the conjunctions you may find introducing subordinate clauses. Some conjunctions can go either way, so you have to see how they're functioning in a particular setting. In our passage we find 3 conjunctions, all of them subordinating. Notice in verse 2 that the subordinate clause beginning with when and the participle in verse 3 modify the first statement about counting it all joy. When clearly signals a temporal clause indicating when they're to count it all joy, and the participle, well, that's more ambiguous. It may be causal. It's because they know the testing of their faith produces endurance they can count it all joy. As you're doing a sentence map, you can add notes about such exegetical decisions. Since both these subordinate elements modify the main clause independently of each other, the first one is indented further to the right than the second one. In this way, each is directly under the verb count. If you were to put knowing under when, or some other element in that clause, then that signals knowing modifies the subordinate clause, not the main clause. If you line the two items flush with each other, then that would signal they're in apposition to each other. Here are some examples of apposition. In the first one we see Paul is identified as a servant of Jesus Christ, and in the second we see this is clarified as being your sanctification, and that is further clarified as abstaining from sexual immorality. Now continuing in verse 3 we see that gives us the content of the knowing, and in verse 4 that now introduces a purpose or result clause. The word that has a lot of uses in English obviously. That is placed under either part of the verb of the clause it modifies, either let or have. Lacking is set off with a comma indicating it modifies the verb may be, probably stating the result of being perfect and complete. Now we move to a level 2 map, and we take the level 1 map and separate out the prepositional phrases. In verse 2, the prepositional phrase indicates where one falls. Verse 3, of your faith, tells us more about what testing is being referred to. And when an item has been moved out of order, its original place is marked by ellipsis points. That way you can reconstruct the original order. In verse 4, in nothing tells us the extent of the lacking. Since in nothing follows lacking in the original order, you don't need to mark its original spot with ellipsis points. I find that a level 2 map is usually enough detail for good exegesis and meditation, but some passages are so complex that a level 3 map is useful. In a level 3 map, all modifiers are placed under the word they modify. The core of each clause is kept on the main line. Those core elements include the subject, verb, direct object, indirect object. I also leave on the main line other items such as conjunctions and negative adverbs. Obviously, not all clauses have all these elements, but these are the items that would be on the main line if they are present. So here's a level 3 map. In verse 2, all tells us how much joy, and my tells us whose brothers and sisters. Both have been moved out of place, and so ellipsis points mark their original spot, allowing us to know the original order. In this case, since two items are on the same line, both having been moved, numbers clarify which came from where. In the second half of the verse, the modifier various is alone on the line, so no numbers are needed. At the beginning of the verse, the vocative my brothers and sisters could be lined up flush with the verb in apposition to the understood subject of the verb. If you do it that way, it would take up all the room under the verb, so you'd need to repeat the verb so the following modifiers could take their place under it. Sometimes repeating material like this will be necessary, but in this case, leaving the vocative on the main line seems less cluttered to me. You can do it either way. Such maps are not an end in themselves, they're a means to understanding the passage, so you should use these techniques in the way that you find helpful. Verse 3 only has your, telling us whose faith. Technically, the modifies testing, so you could put that under the word if you find that helpful. In verse 4, the word work has two modifiers. Numbers clarify the original order. Note the first modifier, its, is moved more to the right than the second one, perfect, since each modifies work independent of the other. Now let's try another sentence. So again, I invite you to pause the video and try mapping this verse with a level 2 map. So in this map we see that the subject is the priest, the verb is brought, and the direct objects are oxen and garlands. Those are the elements on the main line. The subject is further described as being a priest of Zeus, and this priest is further described as having a temple which is in front, and front is clarified as being in front of the city. The verb brought is moved to the right so the following material can be positioned under it. Otherwise the modifiers of the priest would block the line of sight, as it were. The prepositional phrase to the gates is under brought, telling us where he brought the oxen and garlands. The conjunction and introduces a second verb that goes with this same subject, so we have a compound sentence here. The second verb is coordinate with the first, as and indicates, so it's lined up flush with it. Wanted is the second verb, and to sacrifice is a complementary infinitive to it, so they both remain on the line together. Along with the crowds tells us more about the making of the sacrifice. Prepositional phrases can modify either a verb or a noun, so doing a map helps you think through such details that are easily missed when you're simply reading. Here we see the common problem of text going off the right-hand margin. When that happens, you can use the line you see in the map. This symbol is composed of 3 characters. These characters are available in the Times New Roman font, and you can lengthen the line by copying and pasting that middle character as many times as you need to. On the website for using and enjoying Biblical Greek, you can download a document called Line Draw that contains various symbols that are useful in maps, including this particular one. These examples have introduced the main principles and techniques of mapping, and the book gives many more examples and also guidance for various particular constructions we haven't looked at here. Here's a summary of what we've seen in this video. Mapping uses alignment and indentation to depict the flow of a sentence. Items that are coordinate or in apposition are lined up flush, and when one clause modifies another clause, its first word is indented under the verb of the clause it modifies. Core elements in a clause are left on a line together. That would be the conjunction, subject, verb, negative adverbs, direct object, indirect object, and modifiers are indented under the word they modify. If there are 2 or more modifiers, they're indented so that each is directly under the word modified. They're not lined up flush with each other. And if an item is moved out of place, its original location is marked with ellipsis points. Numbers are used when there is potential uncertainty about the original order of items that have been moved. When there's not enough room on a line, then that line draw symbol can be used. Sometimes multiple modifiers require items on the main line of the clause to be moved to the right or to be repeated in brackets to allow the following material to be positioned under it properly. Now that we've seen the main principles in sentence mapping, in the next video we'll go on to see how they're applied to passages in Greek.